Negotiating in an extremely competitive seller's market is tough. It's tough for buyers and for buyers' agents. And this video is coming to you by request to go over some of the option and contingency periods that we are seeing buyers reduce or waive to go under contract, and some of the risks that are inherently involved in doing that. The first one is the due diligence period. So during the due diligence period, if you're using the GAR purchase and sale agreement, which is the industry leading contract here in Georgia, a buyer can terminate a contract for any reason or no reason at all during the due diligence period. Once the due diligence period is over, a buyer is purchasing the property as is, which is why it's so important if the seller making repairs or a price reduction instead of repairs is something that is important to the buyer, that amendment be presented to the seller and signed off on, completely agreed on, before the due diligence period is over. Because once the due diligence period is over, the buyer is contractually purchasing the home as is. Now, a buyer may still have a financing contingency and appraisal contingency that say other things, but just in general, that right to change their mind is over when that due diligence period expires. So try to get due diligence. Never ever recommend no due diligence period. Extremely, extremely risky. If you are an agent and you're watching this video and you're being pushed for no due diligence, give us a call. We'll be happy to go over that specific scenario with you and maybe offer some alternatives or ideas for improving the attractiveness of that offer overall. But no due diligence period is really risky. And if you're a buyer and you have a short due diligence period, having a home inspector on standby, ready to go, is really important. There are some home inspectors out there, I'll include some ideas in the description of this video for you, who are able to get out to a property within 24 hours in a lot of cases, get it inspected, get that report back, can allow the buyer to make a decision if they want to move forward or not. A lot of home inspection reports are going to recommend the buyer seek other advice from other professionals. That's not uncommon. So a buyer may wish to propose an amendment to extend that due diligence period, but a seller doesn't have to agree. A seller never has to agree. And so just making sure that the buyer is interested in moving forward before the due diligence period expires is really important, because if not, and the buyer terminates, they're probably going to lose their earnest money. Now, what about earnest money? Are we seeing an increase in the earnest money? Absolutely. We are seeing some increase in earnest money. Statewide, Seth Wiseman has told us $500 is average. 1% is pretty much industry standard. We are seeing a lot of buyers offer more earnest money. It certainly shows strength. It shows confidence in the buyer's ability to close when they offer more earnest money. Financing contingencies. Buyers taking the time to fully approve their loan up front, to go through the pre-approval, not just a pre-qualification process, is really important. And in a lot of cases, buyers are confident enough that they can waive their financing contingency, or they can significantly reduce the time frame for their financing contingency if they have that pre-approval. Not uncommon anymore for financing contingencies to only have 12 days or 15 days, 10 days for financing contingency in cases where the buyer has been approved up front. There are programs out there, Not Go program, for example, guaranteed offer, that will do that. They will approve the buyer up front, but very important. What about the appraisal gap clause? What about appraisal contingencies? So the appraisal contingencies are going to be on the financing exhibits if you're using the GAR contract forms, conventional, FHA, VA cash. All of these have the appraisal contingency on there. If you're using FHA and you're using VA, it's called a mandatory clause and it's on the second page. What about waiving this, or what about using a gap clause? Unless a buyer can pay for a home in all cash, waiving the appraisal contingency is obviously very, very risky. And then if the home doesn't appraise and the buyer can't close or doesn't close, most likely they will lose their earnest money. But when it comes to the gap clause, and what's so funny about this is a symptom of a seller's market. Before a seller's market, before the last couple of years, appraisal gap clause did exist, but you just really didn't hear about it all that much. Same with escalation clauses, right? So, but with a gap clause, a buyer is agreeing that if the home appraises for less than the offer price, that they are willing to make up the difference. And a good appraisal gap clause will have a cap. Because again, unless the buyer has unlimited resources, they can't pay just any difference. Maybe their difference is capped at $5,000, $10,000, whatever amount that happens to be. So an appraisal gap clause, it is an appraisal contingency. It's just contingent on the home appraising for a lesser amount than the purchase price in the actual contract. So these are just a couple of option and contingency periods that buyers are willing to eliminate or reduce in a very competitive seller's market.